Right. Let's work with Mongo. Let's first start the Mongo server. So for that, we're gonna see first where I have installed the Mongo server. Let's start the terminal. So a common place to install Mongo is in the user locals. Let's take a look at that first. So if you look at the content of user and then local, you'll see that I have installed MongoDB right here. And it is a very common place to put it in on a Mac or a Unix-based operating system. So if we go in there um, into user local Mongo, in there you'll find that there's a bin directory, and the bin directory contains several executables of interest. So let's see. In particular, we have the MongoDB, which is indeed the server. Okay. Also, um, there's a script there to install Compass, but you can also install it by downloading an executable installer and do that as well. But we're interested now in this executable, the MongoDB. Now, to run MongoDB, you also have to specify where you want the database to store its data. And typically, I like to store it in my home directory. So for instance, there's my home directory, and I have a data directory in there, and that's where I'm going to point it to. So right now, there's all these index files and for various databases that I've been using for the last couple of semesters. So to run it, you can either go to the folder where you have the executable, right? Or you can add this particular path, right, to your global path so that you can execute it from anywhere. But I guess it's easier if you go into that particular folder. So anyway, so we have the bin directory, and we can execute in there the MongoDB. Now, if you just run the MongoDB by itself, it's going to complain. It's going to try startup, but it's complaining because it doesn't know where to store the database. So to tell it where to store the database, there's an option called DB path, right? That you can then specify, the folder where you want it to store the database. So I'm gonna give it my home directory and then the data folder. So I'm gonna try this again. I'm gonna run it. Now it does start up and is indeed now in running state, right? Listening to a particular port number, and so that we'll be able to connect with some client that either a shell command or we're going to be using Compass, or you can also install the VS Code extension that allow it to connect to the database. So now that Mongo is running, we can connect to it in several ways. We can connect with the Compass client or with some extension installed maybe in VS Code or some other IDE of your choice. So for now, let's try out Compass. So let's see, let's run Mongo Compass. And Mongo um, will ask you where do you want to connect to, right? And the way you connect to it is by providing the URL of where the database is running. Now, right now we do have MongoDB running on our local machine, but certainly this could be running remotely on some remote server. It could be Atlas Cloud. MongoDB does provide a cloud service, and but locally it is running and listening at port 27,000, and you see that indeed that is the default URL that it provides, so we can connect to it. There's some recent connections that I've connected to, including cluster running on Atlas, and we'll do that a little later. And so here we can connect to the local server, and you see how MongoDB, the server, um, printed out some messages, reacting to the fact that we just connected to it. And these are our databases that I've created over several semesters, and we can create a brand new database for this course. Let's see, we can give it the name, say Twitter for 2023, and then you can create several the first default collection to create it optionally, but you can create it later, either this one or several other a little later. But here let's demonstrate that we can create a database including a brand new collection. There it is. So it created the database and the collection. We can hide this MongoDB server. Yeah, right now this collection is empty. It doesn't have any documents, and you can drop the collection if you want to recreate it, or dump the code, the data that was already stored in there. But if you select it, it shows that there are no documents. You can add data either as a document that you can type here at the at this UI, or you can import a JSON file, a CSV file that it will convert it into records into the database. So let's first show creating some documents from here. So by default, it provides a property that represents the unique identifier of this new document, but we can add additional fields, say several usernames, users that we want to add to the database. Username, we can add maybe a password. Let's add something simple, maybe first name, Alice, and maybe last name, Wonderland. And you can insert the document, and you see that it's added there. You can also use the Mongo shell. Right, this is as if you were typing at the command line or terminal, and where you can interact with the database, not graphically, right, but textually. So, for instance, you can ask it what databases you have. It kind of gives you hints at it, and there it is. So those are the databases. So this is a graphical representation, right? Whereas this is a textual way of interacting the same way. You can also choose that you want to work with a particular database. So, for instance, you can use this one, which is the one that we just created, and then you can ask it to show what collections are already there. And there it is. You have users. You can also once you have the database selected, you can then interact with whatever collections you have in there. So you can say db.users find, allow you to display all the documents that are in that collection in that database, and you see that it's exactly the same thing that you get graphically, but this one is interacting with the same database, but textually.
All right, so we want to be able to interact with the database, right? Instead of manually, we want to be able to do it programmatically. So we're going to be using a library called Mongoose.js, and you can take a look at the documentation here at mongojs.com. So to use it, we're going to install Mongoose. And so while that is installing, right, we can use the sheet that they have here, and we can copy these two lines that show how we can import the Mongoose library. We're going to use the newer syntax import from Mongoose, right? And then we can connect to the database of our choice, right, using the same connection string that we used earlier, right? But we can specify the database at once. And the one we have so far is these here, right? So we have Twitter SU23. So let's use that. So we'll say Twitter SU2-23. I think that's the name. Let's see. Twitter SU23. Yep. Once it's connected, we can start it and see what we get. So we get nodemon app.js. So presumably we are connected to the database, and to interact with the database, we need to specify the collection that we want to query. So to do that, we're going to create a user schema and specify the structure of that collection that we want to interact with. We don't have an email, but we do have a first name, and we have last name, no email. I guess we should have done that. And also we can specify the name of the collection where this data is stored. Once we have the schema, we can create a model out of that. And once we have the model, we can start interacting and querying stuff. So for instance, we can say user find a particular one if you know their username, but instead we're going to say find and just all of them, find all of them. Now the older syntax allowed you to have two arguments. The first one is the filter, right, or the criteria by which you want to retrieve the documents. Empty object means that you want all of them, and then a callback where you can display the users. But I believe this syntax is no longer valid. So let's see that. Yeah, no longer accepts callback. So yeah, this syntax has been deprecated. So there's a newer syntax that allows you to use promises. Right? So we could say constant promise that you can then register for a callback. So you can say user find all of them, and then you can say promise.then, and then display the console. Right? And there it is. So there's the users that we had stored in the database: Alicia, Bob, and Charlie. Or you could use another syntax where you can put everything in a function. So const find all users could be an async function. Yep, where you can use the await syntax to retrieve the users and just display that. Right, and then you can call find all. And then save that, and it works just the same way. There it is. So displays the users. So here we have some interactions with the database, but instead of putting everything in app.js, let's move everything under a users folder. So for instance, this schema, we can put it in a separate file. So we say schema, or it says user schema .js, and we can move the schema there. So let's bring that over. Let's cut that, move it here. We'll need to import a few things. So we'll do import mongoose, and then maybe export this follow the user schema, and then we can create a model. So this would be user model, and there would be this model here. Right? Cut that from here, move it over to the model. For this, we need mongoose. Let's import mongoose, and let's import also the user schema from the other file. And now we have the model, and we can export this. Right? And then now all these interactions with the database, right? Instead of having it here, we can have a dedicated file for that. And a common place to put it is in a DAO, or data access object, that consolidates all the interactions with the database. So let's move that over there. So this just move it over here, and we'll probably need the import, same thing, mongoose, and we'll probably need the model as well. So import user from user model. We don't need all this old stuff. We have the find all functions. Probably might want to export this, right? Export this function, and let's save that, and we'll probably need also to import these guys, right? The user DAO. Now, usually this would be used perhaps from some kind of service or a controller. So, for instance, if we have a controller here, where we want to retrieve these users, right? Which we do, right? Retrieve all the users. Right now, the get users is retrieving it from this array, right? And that should still work, right? So let's say we got local hosts, and what is this map to? To get all the users, so just users, right? Okay, so 4,000, I think, users. So it's retrieving Alice, Bob, and Charlie Brown. But right now it's coming from this array, right? And but instead we want to retrieve this not from this array. Right? We want to be able to comment this out and no longer use the array. Instead, we want to retrieve from this DAO. Right? So let's use that, right? So we're going to just return the users here. And so from the controller here, instead of using the okay, this is by username, right? So we need to retrieve the by username, but let's implement that, right? Because we need to be able to retrieve all the users or all the users by username, right? So let's do that. So in the DAO, we need to find all users. We also need retrieve find user by username. So username. So we're going to provide the username as an argument, and this will be const. Well, there will be just one user, right? And this will be await. And this will be user.find1. You know that username is unique, and we're going to return that user like that. Okay? So if we come here, we got the username, and so if we do have the username, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of using the array, we're going to use the DAO, right? So let's import star as DAO from user DAO, right? So we should be able to say now const user find user by username. It's this one, right? But then because this is using an async, this too needs to be async, right? Right, and async. Oh, async. I forget what's the syntax for function async. So I'm just going to rewrite it using the newer syntax. Like that, right? So it's async, and now we can do an await here. Like that. What is? Can't find what? DAO? User DAO? Can't find the schema. Did I misspell it? Okay, and the user model is this. Oh, I need to add the .js here. All right. So so here we retrieve the single user, we return that user, or we retrieve all the users. So we say const users await find all users. So this function is no longer using the array at all, right? Here's users. It's not being used at all, right? So we should be able to now hit the server with the same, and notice that now we have the data that is in the database, right, as opposed to the one in the array. Just to verify, let's change something real trivial. These are not what were in the array, right? So now we have 6 something something something, right, or users that are in this database. But let's change something just to verify. So let's change, for instance, the password for Charlie, 123 123. Update and do the query again. Notice that indeed the password has changed. See that? Place the get user function, right, from using the array, but we could do the same for all of them. So for instance, get user by ID. Again, we need to convert these into all async functions, so let's do that. So these are const, and this is async, and this the definition here. We get the ID, and instead of using the array, right, we can use a find user by ID. But let's go back to the DAO and implement that. So we can say, export const find user by ID. We're going to pass the ID as an argument. It's going to use the await model find by ID. So find by ID is a function in the model, right? That you give it the primary key and it finds it, and then we can just return the user like that, right? And then in the controller, we can rewrite this, right, by saying const user DAO find user by ID. There it is, right? It's using that function, and then return the user. So let's see if that works. So that should have restarted, and then we should be able to retrieve that particular user. Like that, and there we go. So it works. So the other functions as well, we should be able to replace them one by one. So get user by username, right? We can use this function right here, right? So username, so instead of using the array, you say const user find the DAO, and then we have to rewrite this so that it's a async function. That, and it's part of the params. Params? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Oh no, params. Oh right. So this is we're using some kind of a path username. Oh okay. I see. So let's try that. So let's say we go back. These are all the users. So we should be able to retrieve user Bob by their username. So Bob. That returns Bob. But we also should be able to do the same thing, but with a question mark, right? Where it says username equal Bob. There it is, right? Let's see if that's true, right? We can say Charlie, so that should work, right? Charlie, there we go. So that's two ways we're getting somebody by their username, either by encoding it in the path, which uses this query, right? By username, this one, or by encoding it in the query. So this one is in the parameters in the path, but this is encoding it in the query, right, as part of the question mark there. All right, so we got that. Create user. All these other ones, these we need the help of the user interface, right? Because we can't do posts and deletes and puts and things like that, right? Only programmatically from the UI, or we could use the Postman. All right, so let's take a look at that. So let's work on these other ones of creating and removing and updating. But for that, we're going to be using the user interface to help us generate all these other commands, such as all these posts, deletes, and puts, right? So let's see what we've got so far. So in the user interface, let's run tab to see. I believe we had a screen that allowed us to interact with the user. So let's see, let 5 users. Okay, users allowed us to retrieve all the users and create new users. Let's see, this doesn't seem to be retrieving the users. Oh, looks like it wants to go to render just to retrieve these. Let's take a look at the implementation for the users. So it's labs, and we have lab 5. So we have users, goes to users, which does what? Let's see. It's using get users, which is going to the user API, and the user API is what? React server, blah blah blah. So where's this coming from? So it must be in .env, and .env wants to go to Node.js. Okay, somewhere in the render.js. So let's change this so that locally we don't do that. Right? Locally, we're just going to go to this. So let's copy that. Let's comment that out, and instead use locals 4000. And let's start that. And there we go. Right. So it's going out to Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Now this is going out to what query? This is going out to network. Let's refresh. There it is. So it's going out to /users. Oh, it's still going out to Twitter node server. I guess we need to restart the server for the AMV to take effect. So let's do that. Stop. Restart. And let's refresh this. And okay, now it's going to the local server, and the response is the ones in the database. Okay, perfect. Right? And we don't have any role for this, right? All right. So how do we do that? We want to be able to, for instance, delete. Right? So how do we delete? Right now, if we delete, it's gonna do what? It's really want to delete it from the array, right? So it's removing from here. But if we refresh, it retrieves it. It's there, right? It's not remembering like before. That's because this is going out to where in the server. And the server is being handled how? Handle this delete with this remove server, remove user, which is removing it from the users array. Right? We don't want that anymore. So let's comment that out. So instead, we want to in the DAL, we want to implement delete. So it's export const delete user. Right? We have the ID of the user, and we're going to use the model. We're going to say status. It's going to do an await. It's going to do user.delete1, right? And it's going to execute, and that's going to return a status of whether it was successful or not, right? And then we're just going to return the status. Right? Now, back in the controller, right? We need to first delete. So we're going to do that. We'll say .delete. That deletes the user. Also, this needs to be async. So this is going to const async arrow, right? So that deletes it. But notice that what this is expecting to get back all the users, right, that survived, right, according to this API. So let's retrieve all the users again. So const find all the users, and that's what we're going to retrieve. All right. Okay. So let's the server should have started. So now let's refresh this. So it's okay. There it is. Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Let's delete Bob, and that didn't seem to work. Let's refresh. Okay. So it looks like it did delete it, but we didn't see it immediately. Why is that? Let's see. So all the users are here. Users. Now, there we go. Let's see, JSON delete. Oh, I know, because this needs to be an await, right? So that we don't, this was not waiting for the delete, and it was already retrieving all the users, right? So there was a race condition here, right, where we had not completed the delete, and we were already finding the users, retrieving them before it was deleted. Right? So let's try that. So now let's try deleting Charlie. There it is, right? So now it works. But now it's permanent, right? If I refresh the screen, we lost all those 2 users. So we'll need to perhaps insert. Let's write that next. Let's see how we can create new users. So currently adding the user, this is just adding it to the local array, right? In the server. So we refresh. refresh is just getting it from the database. So it's when we're creating it, we're putting it in the array, but when we're retrieving it, we're getting it from the database. Because all these ads, right? All these ads are going to what? Let's see. It's going to a post, of users, right? And it's sending as payload a user with a first name, last name, username, blah blah blah, all with so where's that handle on the server? So on the server, we're handling that post right here. Post create user, which is just reading the user from the body, right, and pushing it into the array. So we don't want that anymore, right? So we're gonna remove this. And instead, we want to create the new user with this data that's being passed out from the user interface, right? So let's create that. We're going to say, export const create user. That's going to be an async user object and create. There it is. So this create is going to do an insert into the database, and it's going to come back with a new record, right? So we're going to return that. And in here, we can use it as follows. We can say there it is. So that's the new user that was created. It's complaining that this has not been converted into an async. So let's do that. Async and an arrow here. So that's the new user. But this is expecting all the users. So we're going to just go find them all again, right? Like we did when we deleted. Where's the delete? Create, remove, right? So we're just going to find them all again, and then just spit them back to the user. So user. So this create user actually is returning the new user that was created, instantiated in the database, including the user interface, which we're not doing anything with it, right? So we could just take it out if we don't use it, and then retrieve all the users. So let's try that out. Let's go back here. Let's refresh. And now we create, and these are user that I just created. So there was only Alice. If we refresh, we have Edward that has the last name, right, and the ID. Now notice that the ID before we were creating it ourselves, but this one is actually being created by the database. Right? Right, we keep adding Edward. We're going to have another user with a username Edward, or we can someone else. We can say Frank. And Charlie, right, and being added like that, which if we refresh, there they are, right? And if we go to our compass and we refresh, we should be able to see all those new records that were inserted. Let's take a look at being able to update an existing record. Right. So right now the implementation is that we should be able to change the role of a user, and for now it works as sending over the original object, but with a field that contains a role by a string. Now to do this, we're going to have to add this as a valid field in the schema, which currently is not. So in the schema, we're going to change role. So I'm going to say a role. And now instead of just using this as a plain string, we could declare it as being that the type is a string, right? But it can only be of a particular value, set of values. So for instance, it could be admin, it could be faculty, it could be a student. I don't remember in the UI what were the options. So let's take a look at what we did there. So in the right, the values would be admin, faculty, and student. Right, so admin, faculty, okay, that's perfect. Right, yeah. So now in the DAO, right, the current implementation in the controller is that we look for the user in the array, and then we replace that user with whatever comes back from the user interface, right? Because he's a user that has all the updates, and then we just replace the user in the array. So we're not going to do that anymore. So instead, in the DAO, we're going to implement the updates. So the update is takes the ID of the user that we want to change, the new user, and uses the update one command in Mongoose, right? The filter of the record that we want to manipulate, and then using the set command that uh, basically merges whatever the old record was with any changes of the fields that you provide in the user, and then returns the status of if it was successful or not, right? So in this implementation, we are going to use that. We say DAO update user. We'll say wait, right? Because and we have to change this to be async. So this is a wait, right? And let's see, const. Wait. What is it complaining about? Const. Arrow. Why don't you like the arrow? We have the params, user.
I'm so upset I missed the time.
Last night?
What are you complaining about? This here, request, response. Oh, async. There we go. We're going to first update the user with the new user with the fields that were changed, right? And then we're just going to retrieve all the users again and send them back, right? All right. So let's see. Let's try this out. So let's refresh and let's clear this out. Let's do changes to faculty. All right. And did we send the correct? Yeah, there it is, faculty. If we refresh, indeed it was modified, right? And this would be student, and this would be, leave it as administrator. And if we refresh, right, all of them are working. Faculty, student, student. And if we refresh, there's our being updated. If we look at the Mongo record, you'll notice that none of them used to have a role, but if we refresh, notice that the role field has been added to all the records. Okay. Now let's refactor the implementations of registering, logging in, profile, and log out, right? So that we use the database instead of the array. So let's see. So register used to first check to see if there was a user with a particular username. We already can do that, right? So we can replace this with DAL like that. But we need to make this an async function. And if there was a user, right, there was, we responded with an error. Now the user, we would pass in the username and password as part of the body. And we first, actually, we need to create this user, right? We need to insert this user in the database as opposed to push this user to the database, right? We don't want that. So let's do that. We're going to do await, create the user in the database, right? Now this is going to return the actual user that was inserted, right? So this is the const the actual user. Actual user, I guess. Actual user. And that's what we're going to put in the database, in the session, and also I guess in the current user. We're not going to push them in the array, and we're going to return the actual user that was just created. Okay. How about login? All right, so login, we want to see if there is a user that has a username and password. We could do that, right? We can implement that in the DAO. And say export const find user credentials. Credentials presumably are the username and password. Right, so this will be const user await user find one. which the credentials presumably have the username and password, right? And we're going to return the user. Okay. So here, instead of implementing it this way, right, we can say const user find user credentials, and this needs to be an async, right? And so, is there such a user? Yes. So we sent a. If there isn't a user, then we're going to respond with an error. If there is, right, that's the user that we came back from the database. We put them in the current user and the current user, and then we just respond with that user. Perfect, right? And nothing else with the array. Profile doesn't actually use the array, right? So it's just going to respond from the session. And same thing, logout doesn't use the array at all, right? So it looks like this user array, notice it's no longer being used, so we can just safely comment it out. It's gone, right? So yeah, so let's try that. We've been using the local database instance, running MongoDB in our local machine. But if we want to be able to run this remotely on render.js or Netlify, right, we need to be able to run the database also remotely. So there's several places where you can host a database for free, but I'm going to use MongoDB. They have an online cloud solution, so I already have an account there. It's it's free if you keep it under a particular amount of records. So let's see. Let's log in. And so I'm going to create a separate cluster for this particular course. Right? Let's see. So it's loading my clusters. Under Northeastern, create an organization. You can create your organization. Right? So these are the databases that let's see. Northeastern. When you click on databases, right, it lists the databases that are already there. But we can create a new database. Right? This database is from last semester. Right? You can create one for this semester. I'll call it Twitter SU2, and this is the 23. The collection name that we're gonna start is similar to what we did locally, right? But with a local database instance, right? So I'm gonna say users. And say create. So this is gonna create the database. It's empty, obviously. No users whatsoever. We can now we can use this online web interface to interact with it, or we can connect to it using our MongoDB Compass, right? So we can go to database access. I already have a user account that allows me to fully control the database, although I don't remember what the password was. But we can also turn on connectivity so that anybody can connect to. Otherwise, you can provide configurations that only certain people from a particular IP address are allowed to connect. But since this is connecting from render.js and we don't have the IP address for that, I'm just going to open it up. You can add an IP address and say anywhere, either the current IP on the machine that I'm right now, or just say from anywhere as well. If you say 0000, right, it'll just allow anyone to connect. In the database, you can say that I want to connect, and then you can specify how you want to connect to. You know, connect it from Compass, right? You can grab the URL. You can grab this URL, right? And then in Compass, you can manage the database remotely, right? So this is connecting locally, but you can create a new connection. You can say wait a minute. say connect a new connection and provide a different URL and say connect. So this is connect to the remote database. And I guess we need some authorization. Oh, we didn't put the password. Right, in the connection they don't put the password. I don't remember what my password is, but we can create a new user. Let's see, database access. It said add a new user using a password, and this will be maybe Giuseppe, and the password will be super secret password. Did I spell it? Super secret password. Okay, so let's say auto generate password, blah blah blah. So restrict access to specify temporary user. So add user. Does it say this is a role? 0 selected. Okay, I need to add built-in role, custom role, specific privileges. Select role, admin, add user. So I have Giuseppe now, and so in the URL you can specify the username is Giuseppe, and password is a super secret password. Let's say connect. So connecting, there it is, right? So we have the database we just created with no users. So I can do the same thing that I did earlier with my local database, right? Where I had the users like that, right? And so we can create a couple users here. So let's create just some random users here. So let's create username JDo. This will be first name John and last name Doe. Right, so last name Doe. Okay. And I guess we forgot password, so let's say password. This will be 1, 2, 3. Say insert. Okay. We just have one user, right? Now we also want to be able to connect to this not only through our Compass, but also using our Node.js server. So back to database and connect. We can look the driver. And so we can copy this URL and then head over to our Node.js application, right? And instead of using this URL, right, let's comment that out. We can use this new URL. So we can say we can put it actually in an environment variable instead of pasting it in here, right? There we go, like that. Now we need the actual username, so we'll say Giuseppe. So Giuseppe. Again, you would not put this in a file, right? Hard code it in the source code. You would put it in an environment variable. So super secret password. Right. Okay. So it looks like we never did specify the database that we want to use. So Twitter. SU2 23. Let's see if this works. So okay, restarts and come here and refresh. Okay, there we go. So I was able to connect to the remote database. So let's create a few other users. So Edward and Frank, right? And maybe Jane Doe will make them a student, faculty, and administrator. So we go back to the remote
database here in the cluster using Mongo Atlas and we refresh, we see that indeed we were able to add those 3 users with the role selected from the user interface.